Hello, my dear students. In the last class, we have dealt with psychoanalytic criticism, an introduction, and about unconscious. In this class, we are going to deal with Sigmund Freud and his contributions like Oedipus Complex, id, ego, and superego. Let's begin the class. Sigmund Freud, he was an Austrian neurologist and is the founder of psychoanalysis. He was born on 6th of May in 1856 and was died on 1939. In his theory, he said that mind is not so simple. The conscious mind that we are aware of is there, but subconscious actually controls us. And we have dreams, and dreams are the road to unconscious mind. We can access mind through dreams. One of his most enduring ideas is the concept of unconscious mind. And unconscious mind is a reservoir of thoughts, reservoir of memories, reservoir of emotions. And these things are sometimes unaware to our conscious mind. These hidden desires, fears, emotions, memories lie inside our unconscious mind. And it got influence in our present behavior, says Freud. He also proposed that personality was made up of three key elements. His contribution. Our personality was made up of three key elements. What are they? The id, the ego, and the superego. We are going to learn that now. And he is also the author of The Interpretation of Dreams, Studies on Hysteria, 3 essays on the theory of sexuality, totem and taboo, Introduction to Psychoanalysis, Beyond the Pleasure Principle. And the work, 3 essays on the theory of sexuality. In that work, he outlines his theory of psychosexual development and his most important concept, Oedipus Complex, is introduced. And also the other terms, other concepts like castration anxiety, penis envy. Then his another work, Interpretation of Dreams. In that book, he says that dreams are the road to unconscious mind. Through dreams, you can analyze certain symbols, and you have to understand those symbols, and you can identify your unconscious. And is another work, Totem and Taboo. In that he says that it is the collection of 4 essays. And he also applied psychoanalysis to other fields including religion, anthropology, and archaeology in that work. And there's another work, Introduction to Psychoanalysis. He outlines his theory of psychoanalysis, including the unconscious mind. And he also speaks about his theory of neurosis and dreams. He also did his hysteria studies, that is, studies of hysteria, which was influenced by Bible, Darwin. He emphasized that language concealed or modified hidden desires, anxieties, and fears. In a work of fiction, the language actually conceals certain hidden desires, or it is expressed in a different way. That is why he says that through the language, through the written work, through the fictional work, you can actually identify the author's psyche. You can study the author himself, its psyche, his hidden desires, fears, all that is expressed through language. And through psychoanalysis, you can easily identify the author's psyche. The hidden, his unconscious is revealed through language. His point was that desire doesn't express itself easily because culture doesn't allow it. We have certain animalistic desires in ourselves, but we will not express it so easily because we know that is prohibited by the culture. It is not suited to our morality. It's not suited to our way of life. So we deny all those things. His point was that desire doesn't express itself easily because culture doesn't allow it, and we need to pay attention to language and other forms of expression to discover it. But if we pay attention to the language written, if we pay attention to the novel written or the poem written, you can easily identify the unconscious mind of the psyche. If you do a psychoanalysis of the work, you can understand the author's psyche, or you can understand the fictional character. That is why when Freud studied Hamlet, he found that Hamlet also have Oedipus complex in him. Don't worry, we are going to look into that. Freud explored the link between language and unconscious. There is a link between language and unconscious. There is a connection between language and unconscious. Through the language written, you can see the unconscious. You can understand the unconscious mind. Sexuality is the drive that is more subject to the social and cultural forms of control. Freud in theory emphasizes the role of the individual sexuality in making of an unconscious. Sexuality plays a very important role. That, as per Freud, it is the drive that is most subject to social and cultural norms of control. എല്ലായിടത്തും സൊസൈറ്റിയും കൾച്ചറും എല്ലാം പ്രൊഹിബിറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അത് ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ദ വെരി ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻ്റ് ആസ്പെക്ട് സെക്ഷുവാലിറ്റി. We have, when we studied structuralism, Claude Lévi-Strauss, we talked about incest. No, sexuality. There are certain incest taboos in the society, and it is the drive that is more subject to the social and cultural norms of control. Psychoanalytic criticism emphasizes the role of sexuality. The criticism emphasizes the role of sexuality and its effect on the individual's character, individual's personality, and the sex drive in the making of a person's subjectivity. That is a very crucial thing. The sex drive, it is a very crucial thing. It builds up the person's overall feelings. It builds up the person's overall subjectivity. Freud distinguished three components of the human psyche. Human psyche is composed of three things: ego, superego, and the id. We will talk about id first. It is the most basic part of the personality. It represents our most animalistic urges. All our repressed desires are there in the id. It is the area of instincts, our dreams, desire. All that doesn't come to the fore in our consciousness. It is all hidden in the id, that part of human psyche. In the id, all our desires, dreams, instincts are there. Basic part of the personality. Our urges, our animalistic urges, sexuality, the sex drive, the repressed desires are all there in the id. It is the unconscious, you can say. The natural impulses of a person is there in the id. And if you come to the ego, it is the conscious mind which we work with. The reality, the social reality. We know we cannot always attain the id. We cannot always satisfy id. Ego mediates between the id and the moral values. It is the source of our decision making. We make decisions in the ego. It is the source of our decision making, our rational thought also. It deals with reality, and it also meets the desires of the id. It is, we make the decisions, we make meet the desires of it, but look the rational way also. Look into the ways which society is acceptable in the world. It is the conscious mind we work with. Ego is the conscious mind. You can say it is the unconscious. All our hidden desires are there. Ego is the conscious mind. It is the unconscious. In the ego, we have our reality. We look into the society, and we also look into the urges, and we make a decision. That is in the reality, that is closely associated with the reality around you. But it doesn't look into that reality and all. It is just, it stays for the animalistic urges. It represents our animalistic urges, the id. And the other one is superego. Actually, superego, it is the moral principles that drive us, the ideal self. The superego actually develops last. It is based on morals, judgments about right and wrong. Even though the superego and the ego may reach the same decision about something, superego's reason for that decision is based more on moral values. It is our conscience. It is also drawn from social settings and cultural codes and influences the way the conscious works. See, if you take an example, the reality as the person ego is there, and bad angel, if you say, for example, bad angel lies there with the id for your animalistic urges that I want it now, like that. It just standing beside you, and the other side you have superego, or in the form of angel, good angel. You have the other side, superego, of moral values, morality. No, don't do that now. It is not socially acceptable. That the superego is working there. And the ego, the reality, stands. The conscious mind is lying in between them. And ego actually solves both superego and id. For example, I can say that a person is Ravi is very thirsty, and he can't wait to have a glass of water, and he just comes and sit with his friends, and he just takes the other person's water and he drink that. That he person, the id is working there. He can't wait for the his glass of water. He can't wait. He just comes there and have the other person's water. His animalistic urge for water drives him to do that. He can't wait. And superego, what does it do? Superego does that. A person, for name Rahul, he knew that he can actually steal some things from his, steal supplies from his work, or steal money from his cash drawer. Nobody would be knowing it. He's the one who's dealing with the cash. Nobody would be would be knowing that. He can actually take 100 rupees. But he knows that stealing was wrong. It is morally wrong. And he decided not to take anything, even though he knows that he will not be caught. His moral principles guides him to not to do a wrong thing. Stealing is wrong. He knows that. And for ego, for example, I can tell you that a person is very much thirsty. Ravi is very much thirsty. And he knew that the other person would be coming and refill his glass. And he waits there to get his drink, but he wants to drink from the other person's glass. He is very much thirsty, but he denies himself to take the other person's water. He waits there for the server, for the boy to come and refill his glass, but he wants to drink the other person's water immediately, but he stays away from doing that. Okay, so that is the ego, superego, and the id. Id is the source of our animalistic urges, all our desires, animalistic urges, desires. The things are all there in our id. It always prompts you to do that, no problem. It is for the pleasure you are living in this world. Just go and do that. It asks you to do that. And superego says, no, don't do that. It is morally wrong, socially wrong. Don't do that. Superego drives you there. And ego takes a decision there. The reality deals with the reality. No, we will not do it that now, and we will do it later. Okay, ego is the one which deals with reality. It is the consciousness. It is the rational thoughts where we are dealing with. It is the source of our decision making, the ego. So where do we have to stand? Ego, superego, or the id? Never go into never go behind id, right? Always don't be more superego. A person who is controlled by superego cannot do anything. Cannot do anything. Everything is controlled by superego, morally good, morally upright. A person should be in between this. Everything should be balanced. No, our ego should work like that. Or every component should be in a balanced way. It should work. See, you can see the picture here. Id, all our instincts. Superego, the moral value, the good angel. It is the bad angel. Ego is the reality. Your living, your conscience, your reality. And in the iceberg example, ego is in our conscious level, and superego is projected a bit in the conscious level, and more it is than the preconscious level, and some portions are there in the unconscious level. Ego deals with the reality. It is mainly at the conscious level. Superego are all our ideals, moral values, and it strives for the perfection of the subject, the person's conscience. And it operates mostly at the preconscious level, the level between conscious level and unconscious level. And it is lies in the unconscious level, the basic impulses of sex or hatred, aggression. And it wants immediate gratification, the irrational. It is irrational, it is impulsive. And it operates at unconscious level. You can also imagine that it works with the pleasure principle. You're living for the pleasure only. You have to follow your pleasure. We've got only one life. You have to follow whatever your mind asks you to do. That is the id, unconscious level. All irrational thoughts, impulsive thoughts. If I want it now, if I want something now, I want it right and then. I can't wait for anything. That is id. Id is controlling a person. But person must not be controlled by id. We must not subject to our id. We must be ready to live in our ego, where superego also plays a major role, and id also getting gratified. Ego deals with the reality, the rational thing. You have to balance both superego and the id. So that's it about id, ego, and superego. Always be in the real reality. Never be the person who is controlled by the id. As human beings, we need to control ourselves. Sometimes our mind says, see, when we sit for a longer time in mobile phones playing our games and all, you want to play it right now, a game, you want to play it right now, then your super ego says, no, don't play it now, just keep the mobile for a second, and you go and help your parents, or you go and study for some time. That your super ego says. And your it says, I wanted to play it right now. You cannot control it. And ego is in the reality, ego actually then take a decision like that. I'll play it for 1 minute, and I'll go and help my parents, or I'll study for some time. So you have to be in the ego, you have to be in the reality. Don't be detached from reality. Don't be detached from the social circumstances. Be adjusted to the social reality around you. Be rational. Don't be irrational. Don't subject to id, the urges of id. Yes. The process through which certain desires, especially sexual, are pushed into the unconscious so that they do not influence our daily lives and our conscious mind is called repression. The process through which our certain desires, our sexual desires, are pushed into the unconscious, that process is called repression. Or you can say the banishing painful thoughts to unconscious. It is the process of repression. Freud himself described the concept of repression, that is, the process through which sexual desires are pushed into the unconscious. This process as the cornerstone of psychoanalytic theory. Sexuality is the basis of all this theory. However, what is repressed does not always stay repressed there. Unconscious desires that is there will not be repressed always. It can come into dreams. These unconscious this unconscious desires emerges in our dreams, or in the language we write, in the fictional work, in the language we write, you can analyze that. Or sometimes jokes, he says that sometimes this unconscious emerges. Psychoanalyst explores these images and uncovers those desires that have been repressed. Psychoanalyst, when analyzing a work, explores dreams, images, or jokes, or art, and uncovers or shows that desires which have repressed. That's what Freud found out in Hamlet. All human life is caught in the tensions generated by two basic principles. What are they? The pleasure principle and the reality principle. The pleasure principle is one where all our acts are governed by the need to attain pleasure. Id. Pleasure principle is one where all our acts are governed by the need to attain pleasure. Life is a human life, we are living only to get pleasure. That is the pleasure principle, if we go on like that. And sometimes we may think that we are living our life, we are living our life for pleasure only. If you think like that, what will happen? And the reality principle enables us to understand our pleasures cannot be fulfilled the way we want them. Reality principle, the ego, it makes us to understand that all pleasures cannot be fulfilled. You have to make sacrifices sometimes. We cannot fulfill all our pleasures. See, all these pleasures are based on our sexuality, as per Freud. You cannot attain certain things. Reality principle forbids you. No, and it makes us understand that all pleasures cannot be fulfilled. And pleasure principle and the reality principle and the human life is in between, the tension between these two basic principles. Sexuality is the primary drive in our subjectivity, according to Freud. He termed our sexuality as libido. Freud termed our sexuality as libido. According to Freud, not all sex drives can be put into operation. What we gets repressed primarily is a sex drive. The sex drive is the one that we get repressed in our unconscious. In the process of repression, sex drive is repressed in our unconscious. And now we move on to Oedipus complex. Oedipus complex is a theory of Sigmund Freud and occurs during the phallic stage of psychosexual development. It involves a boy aged between 3 and 6 becoming unconsciously sexually attached to his mother and hostile towards his father, who he views as a rival. And he is talking about Freud, talking about boys. It involves a boy in his age between 3 and 6 is unconsciously sexually attached to his mother. That is what Freud says. And he gets an aversion towards his father unconsciously. In the young boy, the Oedipus complex or a conflict arises. The boy develops an unconscious desire for his mother, an unconscious sexual desire for his mother at the age of between 3 and 6. You can say that boys gets more attached to mother during his this time. And Freud says that it is that attachment, it is based on the unconscious sexual desire for his mother. And this desire makes him jealous towards the father. He become envious towards his father because he came to know that mother's affection and attention towards the father is more towards the father, and he becomes jealous towards his father. And these feelings for the mother lead to certain fantasies, and he just wants to get rid of his father and he wants to take his place with the mother. These are all Freud's concepts, okay? And he gets an hostile attitude towards his father, and it leads to his castration anxiety, an irrational fear that the father will remove his penis as a punishment if he is if he continues to keep an affection towards his mother. And he feels hostile towards his father, and later a castration anxiety that he may get fear that his father will remove his penis as punishment. And to cope with this anxiety of removing his penis, the son identifies with the father, and he feels that, and he adopts or he internalizes the attitudes of the father, he internalizes the characteristics of the father, he internalizes the values of the father, and he began to see the father as an authoritarian figure, and he began to see hero as the father. Father becomes a role model for him at that time rather than a rival. Boys acquire their superego through this identification and the male sex role. And the boy substitutes his desire for his mother towards other women later. And his desire for his mother is repressed in the unconscious. The desire for the mother is shut away in the unconscious. The Oedipus complex enabled Freud to argue that all desire based on the condition of this prohibition, all repression and anxiety are based on this condition of prohibition. And he termed this prohibition as taboo. The child never really overcome this complex, but it is just repressed in the unconscious. It just shuts it away. Sigmund Freud chose the term Oedipus complex to designate a son's feeling of love towards his mother and of jealousy and hatred towards his father. Although those were not emotions that motivated Oedipus' actions or determined his character in any ancient version of the story. I'll tell you about the story now. And Freud's own suggestion about Prince Hamlet, the Shakespeare's famous work Hamlet. And it was later developed by Ernest Jones, another writer. And in the analysis of Shakespearean work Hamlet, He found that in the psychoanalysis study, he found that Hamlet always feels unable to kill his uncle. His uncle killed his father, and as a revenge, he wants to kill his uncle, but he cannot kill his uncle. He postpones this action of killing because he feels that the study says that Hamlet wants to kill his father because he had fixation towards his mother. Oedipus complex was working. He had love towards an incest love towards his mother, and it was repressed in his unconscious, and he had hatred towards his father, and his uncle killed his father. His feeling, he it could actually, his patricidal wishes came true through his uncle, so he cannot kill his uncle. This is what Hamlet's example told by Freud when he did a psychoanalysis of Hamlet. So now we will look into Oedipus Rex, the story, and how Freud used this term, Oedipus Complex. Laius, the king of Thebes, was warned by a prophecy that his son, Laius' son, would kill him. So accordingly, when his wife Jocasta bore him a son, he asked to break the baby's feet and to expose for a death. But the shepherd took pity on the infant, and they gave the baby to Corinthian king Polybus. They gave the baby. And the king Polybus of Corinth and his wife brought up the boy as their son. In his early manhood, Oedipus, the new prince of Corinth, visited Delphi, a place in Greece, and he came to know that he was fated to kill his own father and marry his mother. So he resolved never to return to Corinth. As considering his story, his father is King Polybus and his mother is his wife. So in order to avoid that fate, he didn't return to Corinth. And he traveled towards Thebes, his original place, and he encountered King Laius there. King Laius provoked a quarrel. In that quarrel, Oedipus killed Laius, his father. And he continued his way, and Oedipus found a riddle. Oedipus found Sphinx. It was a mythological creature with a lion's body and a woman's head, and it is an important image in Greek art. And it put a riddle on all passers-by and destroyed those who couldn't answer. And the question was, what was the creature that in its infancy has 4 legs, in its prime has 2 legs, and in the old age has 3 legs? And he answered, it is the man. അല്ലെ, ചെറുപ്പത്തിലെ കുഞ്ഞുങ്ങളായിരിക്കുമ്പോൾ എഴഞ്ഞു പോകുമ്പോൾ 4 കാലിൽ, പിന്നെ 2 കാലിലാണ് അവരുടെ യൗവനം മുഴുവനും. 3 കാലെന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ ഓൾഡ് ഏജിൽ എന്താണ്, ഒരു വാക്കിംഗ് സ്റ്റിക്കൊക്കെ പിടിച്ച് 3 കാലം, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരാളുടെ ഹെൽപ്പോട് കൂടിയിട്ടാണ് ഓൾഡ് ഏജിൽ അവർ നടക്കുന്നത്. ദാറ്റ് ഇസ് ദി 3 legs. When Oedipus solved the riddle, he answered, it is man. The Sphinx killed herself. And in reward, he was received the throne of Thebes and the hand of the widowed queen. They didn't know. The king was died. King Laius was killed. And the queen became a widow. And he married his mother Jocasta. He didn't know that. They had 4 children. Later, when the truth became known that he he has killed the father and married the mother. Jocasta committed suicide. Oedipus blinded himself and he went to exile. This is the story of Oedipus that killed father and married mother. And that is why Freud also took the name Oedipus. Actually, this Oedipus complex has nothing to do with the story of Oedipus, but he took the name and he termed Oedipus complex for this mother fixation. ദാറ്റ്സ് എ സ്റ്റോറി. അപ്പോൾ എനിക്ക് ചിലപ്പോൾ നിങ്ങൾ കണ്ടിട്ടുണ്ടാവും ഇലക്ട്ര എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ മലയാളം മൂവി, നയൻതാര, പ്രകാശ് രാജ്, മനീഷ കൊയ്രാളൊക്കെ ഒരു മലയാളം മൂവി കണ്ടിട്ടുണ്ടാവും. അതിൽ ഓവർ ഒബ്സഷൻ ആണ് ഡോട്ടർ ടുവേർഡ്സ് ഹർ ഫാദർ, over obsession, and that is also their Electra complex, and he is he sees and she sees mother as the rival, and that is Electra complex. So we have looked into the Oedipus story, Oedipus complex, id ego, super ego, Freudian terms. Okay, so we are winding up the session for today, and we will meet with Lacan in our next class. Thank you.